Hello. I know you've had quite a long day, and I'm going to try and, well, I'm not really going to try and sum up all that's gone before, because I know you've talked about such a range of things today. But I'm going to talk about some research that colleagues and I have done around impact, and really my focus has been on the social sciences. So I think you've talked a lot today about sciences, but our work has been how science and social science can work together to create impact. And so I was an academic at the London School of Economics. I'm now based at the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology. So I'm kind of moved from the academic side, thinking about how to influence government and policy making, and I'm now in government, in Parliament, trying to do that. And just as a note, it's much easier to write about it in theory than do it in practice, sadly. But I'm going to start by very quickly going over how our research thought about how impact happened. And one of the reasons that we did this, as I say, our focus was on the social sciences, and it felt to us very much that discussion around impact tended to have sort of a science basis. So the models that we used were quite linear. So you create a drug, and then you give people the drug, and then people get better. And you know, that was the way that you created impact. Well, in terms of social sciences, that doesn't work very well. We know that impact there is created in a collective way, in an incremental way. And so we created this idea about a dynamic knowledge inventory to sort of try and get over the model of how we thought impact happened in the humanities and the social sciences. So let's imagine this slightly odd shape represents all academic knowledge. And we can distinguish between sort of knowledge that's currently being used and knowledge that's sitting on dusty shelves in libraries, not really being used very much. We also know that there's different types of knowledge. There's ordinary knowledge, the stuff we know by doing. There's applied knowledge and research, that kind that I now try and use to help policymakers think about legislation. And then there's very theoretical, very abstract knowledge that pushes forward disciplines. We know that academics aren't the only people who create knowledge also. There's a whole host of people in the system. There's people based in government, in business, in civil society. And they take academic research transmitted by publishers, and they make use of it, they reuse it, and they churn it back into this existing stock of knowledge. Now, what we're trying to do when we're talking about impact is two things, really. We're trying to increase that size of the picture that is knowledge that's currently in use. And we're also trying to increase the number of ways that research is picked up and used and has impact, which is trying to show by all those mad arrows. And obviously, publishers have a key role to play here in facilitating this, in increasing the ways that academic research is picked up and found by those who might find it useful, and also to hold the stock of knowledge that's currently in use and to help that be circulated. Another way we try to think about this is to look at the flow of knowledge from academia to wider society. So often when you're thinking about academic scholarship, you're talking actually about discovery, about whole new ideas, new ways of working. But actually when you're thinking about impact, two different types of scholarship, integration and application, are a bit more useful. So integration, obviously, drawing together all that we know within academia and then thinking about how that might answer real-world problems, and also applying things that we found out about one area to another area, and then taking this knowledge across what we've called here the impacts interface, involving all the different actors that might help there, so media, professions, businesses, think tanks and policy communities. And I mean, something that to think about is how publishers can facilitate the relationship across this impact interface. It often seems to academics that they bring the knowledge of these kind of organisations to bear when they're publishing their work. And universities now are creating more roles around for impact officers to really try and facilitate this link across impact interface. And it will be interesting to hear maybe in discussion how you think publishers are also playing that role. Something that we were asked constantly when we were doing research by academics is, can I both publish in a way that I need to in order to get promoted, in order to advance, but also do the things that I need to do to have impact? And as part of our research, we put together a data set of 350 academics and tracked all their academic publications, but also came up with a scale for their external visibility, to finding references to their work in the world outside universities. And if academics could only do one or the other, if they had to pick, we'd obviously expect all these nice dots to hug the axes on this graph. Actually, what we found is that there's a lot of academics that are able to do both and are doing this really effectively. So we've created some nice titles here, which I think you'll find solid middle being the most imaginative. But, you know, there are these communicators, influentials, those who are really able to publish in a way that helps them within academia, but also really enables them to create impact and influence in the world outside universities. But interestingly, the biggest chunk here is still the group that we've called publishers, and they are not quite yet able to do both. They're sort of what I call head down publish in order to they're often younger researchers who, you know, really need to advance within academia, and that's how they're doing it. They're frantically publishing, but they haven't yet been able to take the time or have the skills to be able to then take that work and try and create impact from it. And again, that's another kind of core audience where publishers' skills and expertise will really bring to bear in helping them create impact. One thing that I will be talking about is the use of social media in order to help create impact, and this is exactly where these kind of social media effects we expect to see really drawing some of that group of publishers up into the, again, need a better word, blue blob of those academics who are able to do both of these activities really well. Now, we came up with this a few years ago. Our research has been ongoing for some time, and happily, results from the recent Research Excellence Framework seem to agree with our findings, which is always nice. So this is the results of the REF 2014, and as you can see here, there's a real correlation between the impact quality score and the output quality score. So those from the impact case studies, but also from the outputs that were submitted to the REF, that there seems to be this link between excellent impact and excellent academic work. So what can focusing on impact show us? This is something that I think impact can sometimes be seen as a bit of a dirty word within academia. You know, everyone had to go through the REF and it was awful and everything. So partly this is me trying to say, actually, it might have had some use beyond that. So what has it helped us see about how academia research and translation, that communication works? So I think firstly it's helped us think about what and how we are researching. And again, using results from the REF, there was a very strong message that impactful research tended to be multi- and interdisciplinary and multi-authored. And the finding from an evaluation piece of work that colleagues at King's College London, and that's the report heading there, found was that over 80% of the REF impact case studies included underpinning research that was multidisciplinary. So that's a really key finding. I know now that I'm in government, policymakers are quite frustrated when academics come to them and say, oh, well, I can only provide answers in this specific area, when actually what they need is joined up answers, and teams of academics or publications that allow these findings to be drawn together. So that's a really key finding, and something that I think isn't always well served by the way that the publishing industry is set up now. So journals tend to be quite siloed in the same way as academic departments tend to be quite siloed. We are also seeing increased international co-authorship in the UK, and that's quite an interesting finding because, again, this was something that our work found increased the chances of being impactful. So both international and national co-authorship actually are found to increase citations, and in the UK, for example, in some subjects, co-authoring between, for example, supervisors and PhD students is a really important aspect of developing the next generation of researchers. We also found this in our research. We found that although most of the outputs in our data set only had one author, more sites went to those outputs that had at least one other author, so co-authors. So, we can already see that there's evidence around this. We don't absolutely know why this is the case. I mean, it might be as simple as if you've got two authors to tell people about the paper, more people get to hear about it. But it'll be really interesting to see some more research on why this might happen. And this slide, if you can see, is using our data set and comparing academic citations, so those that you find through journals, with external references. So this is where we searched across whole of the web for the academics in our data set and looked at references in, for example, government documents, if they'd sat on the board of a civil society group or a business, or if they'd turned up in the newspapers. And it's interesting to see how different disciplines tend to have more academic citations versus external citations. And as you can see here, that the humanities disciplines in our sample tended to have many more external citations to their academics than internal ones, than to scholarly ones, and it's the opposite for the science subjects. So that was just an interesting finding for us, and we don't quite know, again, why that is the case, but comparing these academic citations with more external references, I think, is a really interesting thing to continue to look at. So the second thing that we can tell from looking at impact is how our work is communicated, and obviously this is a key area for publishers. So one big move that we've seen is the increase in open access publishing. And that's something that is very supported within the academic community. I now that I'm working in Parliament, I can see how important open access publishing is, even within the Houses of Parliament and within government departments. There is very little access to subscription-only journals. But there's also a lot of confusion about what open access actually means. So there's not a recognition that an open access version might just be an earlier version of an article that pitches up. There's lack of understanding about embargoes. So there's also some work to do there to make sure that as we increase the number of open access publications, that those are understood, that the quality is the same, is understood by those in government, in Parliament, to make sure that the effects of open access are really felt in terms of take-up. There's also, of course, the fact that many more academics are being their own communicators, and we now have these more digital scholars. We've mentioned already ResearchGate, and there is obviously a lot of controversy around these, but these tools are available, and a growing number of academics are using them. When we did our research, actually ResearchGate and academia.edu weren't actually as much around as they were now. So we asked how many academics used different tools. We were quite surprised to see LinkedIn used so heavily by academics. as a way to communicate the research, but it was an interesting finding. And I think if we did that now, things like the use of Twitter, I think, would be much, much higher up in that line. But this work was done about 3 years ago now. We're also seeing how universities are kind of taking to these tools, using these tools to help their academics, take that first step to making impact and just making their research more visible. So this is some work that colleagues at the National Centre for Research Methods did, just comparing Twitter as a dissemination tool with their more usual ones of an email newsletter or an email bulletin. And they found that Twitter really was a way to increase the number of readers for a particular report, especially when it was picked up, it says, by a Radio 1 resident psychotherapist, which you really can't bank on, but seems to have worked very well in this case. But it's also quite interesting, a study that I saw by someone at the library of the National University of Singapore, and they were looking at articles that had scored highly on altmetrics and then compared their score on citations, more traditional citations, to see what they could see in terms of the differences. And they were often finding that, for example, a particular graph, a particular figure was being shared very widely on social media, but that wasn't translating into cites for the entire article. So I think there's also an interesting relationship about how we're going to show different aspects of academic research and how we can use these tools to sort of pick up the influence, the importance and particular bits of an article or a book, and that I think we'll need to understand a bit more closely. I'm a big fan of academic blogging. As Anthony said, I actually started 6 academic blogs while I was at the LSE, and the LSE Impact blog, I think, is maybe one of the most well read, and it really is worth a read if you haven't, and I would say that, but do anyway. But I think we're starting to see a lot of evidence about how academic blogs, as a way to reach out to policymakers, to those in the business community, to those in civil society, and they're great because they're short, accessible versions of articles that may have been published in more traditional journals. They can also be linked to, and so that readers can both see the short version and click through into get the longer version if they want to. Okay, have I got 5 minutes? Yeah. Oh God. That's a really key way that research is communicated, and I think as academics we're having to think about this. It could actually change the way that we do research, and this is a really interesting post from the Impact blog where an academic talked about how she'd been at a conference, she was really frustrated by some of the discussion going on, she tweeted about it, a few colleagues kind of found her through that tweet, they wrote a blog post about it, and from that a really rich collaboration came about which led to a blog post and then actually a book. So that's really changing the way that academics collaborate and how they get together to produce research. But there are also signs that actually it may just be academics using this new tool as a way to essentially talk to each other about the same things they were talking to each other about before, but just in different formats. The next thing that this focus on impact helps us with is how our work is translated. And this is where we found a really key difference between the social sciences and the science subjects. We looked across all of the references to the academics in our data set, and we found a much bigger thing that we called the mediating middle in the sciences. So that is specialist media, research institutes that are very policy or business relevant, and societies that are basically there to help science communication, help academic research reach out into that external audience. There's a much smaller mediating middle in the social sciences, and so we have to do more work to help our research have impact. But again, this is a role that publishers play, and it would be really interesting to hear from you about sort of how you see your role in being part of that mediating middle. In our analysis, we actually included publishers in the sort of traditional academic box, but it would be interesting to hear if you felt maybe we'd misplaced you there. And, I mean, we looked at this sort of translating the industry around mediating, translating academic work, and found that it really does add value to the value that we'd already identified as coming from the social sciences in the UK. So a very, very conservative estimate of mediators that are based within government, within civil society and within business is this 410,000 figure, which, you know, adds together with the value that we identified from social science research to make £24 billion going towards the UK economy, which, you know, sounds pretty healthy to me. And that's, so we were trying to show the sort of the size and scale of this mediating kind of group. Something that I think is going to be really key, and we've seen a lot of discussion about this, is how we're going to measure impact, so the use of metrics. I was part of the HEFCE metrics review that was asked by HEFCE to look at whether metrics could be made more use of in our research culture generally, but specifically in relating to the next ref. And this was a really key concern, that metrics focus on what's measurable at the expense of what's important. But as we say here, when you design a metric for impact, for example, you're explicitly constructing a definition of what impact is, and when you go on to use that metric, you're locking in that definition. And this was something that the research community were very, very concerned about. And I think especially when you're thinking about impact, that we're still really struggling to understand. This isn't something that's been with us for very long, and we're still trying to really understand it. There's a whole basket of metrics that we could look at, and, you know, all the kind of things discussed here. And that was something that we looked at very closely in the metrics review. But it's also something that the team from King's looked at when they did the evaluation of the REF. So we've got these 7,000 impact case studies, and actually the team slightly jokingly said there were 7,000 metrics that were used in those 7,000 cases. So there are no metrics at the moment that seem to be across all disciplines, that seem to be relevant for all sectors. And so their judgment was that the development at the moment of robust impact metrics is unlikely, or it isn't there yet for us to be able to use metrics as a way to measure impact in the way that we can do from peer review at the moment. And metric tools are developing quickly. I didn't realise Jean was going to be here. So altmetric just being one of them. But I think it's also really key at the moment. We shouldn't be trying to lock in tools to use for impact, because these are developing so quickly, and we don't want to sort of cut ourselves off from tools that might be useful by, right now coming to a sort of prescribed list. So we're seeing all sorts of innovations. We're seeing publishers trying short-form books. We're seeing new journals that are based on the full range of the research life cycle. We're seeing new open access journals in the humanities. But what we know, I think, is that the impact agenda is here to stay. We know that we're in a period of real change for the research system. We've just had the nurse review out today, so looking at how our research councils are structured. We've got a higher education green paper. We've got a minister that seems very keen on metrics as a way to measure the impact that the sector is having. So I think publishers are a key part of this conversation, and I think could bring significant help to the effectiveness of all these activities that academics are undertaking. So I think this is a really interesting, scary, vibrant time, and I'll be really interested to hear your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.